This is Around the A, a weekly look at the top stories, news, and interviews from the NHL's top developmental league, with your hosts David Foote and Patrick Williams on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Around the A is back on the Sports Podcasting Network. A little bit of a break due to some busy schedules, but in 2 weeks, a lot goes down, and there's a lot to talk about this week with myself, David Foote, and Patrick Williams, of course. Glad to have you with us. Lots of good stuff to come up on the show here this week. We're going to talk about what everybody seems to be talking about, the coronavirus and how it's affecting things. We're going to chat with Rob Lippolis, the voice of the Binghamton Devils, about why that team has been so red hot of late, and Gerry Cantlon from Hartford is going to join us a little bit later on once more to update how things are going with the Wolf Pack and talk about some other storylines around the league. Pat, it's been a busy couple of weeks for both of us. It's nice to be back, though.
Yeah, it is, and you're not kidding. We've had, in the past, 15 days, we had the NHL deadline, we had the AHL deadline. We've had all sorts of shifting in the standings. We've had an affiliation change. We have potential affiliation changes still to come. And last but not least, like you said, this corona health issue. Wow, this is a storyline I don't think any of us saw coming when the season started, or even maybe a few months ago. But certainly it's taken the entire sports world and really all of society by storm. And I think this is a situation everybody's trying to feel their way through it and come up with some sort of plan on the fly, because it's not looking good right now.
No, it's not. And we're going to get into how that situation is affecting the American Hockey League a little bit later on in the show. But we'll kick things off the way we always do here on Around the A. And, first we'll remind you that you can get us online on the Sports Podcasting Network and pretty much anywhere else you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe and rate the podcast as well, so we can keep getting some numbers on how this thing's doing 19 episodes in. But as we do most weeks, we'll start with a recap of some of the stories of the past week and a little bit of who's hot, who's not. And it's tough to ignore the Providence Bruins, Pat, when you pull up the standings and you look at an 11-game win streak that's part of an 12-game unbeaten streak. Providence Bruins getting hot at the right time here.
Yeah, this is classic Providence Bruins. They always seem to have a slow start in the first half, and then the second half rolls around and they find their stride. And it's never typically a team full of stars, and super top prospects, but it's a lot of good prospects. I think they make up more in quantity rather than just the top high-end guys. And they always seem to find a few good veterans there and have excellent head coaching staff. I mean, Providence over the years has been a factory for NHL head coaches. Peter Laviolette came through there. Scott Gordon came through there. Mike Sullivan, right down the list. Bob Francis way back when. So it's the kind of place you can go as a young head coach. It's a very patient way of doing things, and the oldest affiliation in the entire American Hockey League. It's really successful. They've won 11 in a row, tying a franchise record that they first established back in 98-99. That was that Providence team was a pretty wild story. They had a 70-point turnaround from the previous season. They went on to win the Calder Cup that season and send a fair number of guys onward to the NHL for a while. So it's a real proud AHL city. They've had a long history there, going back to the Bruins and even back beyond then to the Providence Reds. This team this year, they're looking really good. They're 1 point out of the Eastern Conference lead, and if they can jump ahead of the Belleville Senators and Hershey Bears, both them and both Boston and Providence, respectively, would be leading their conferences. So it's a real testament to what that entire team and that farm system has done this season.
Yeah, if you want to know more about the Providence Bruins, go back to some of our older episodes of Around the A. We had John Ferguson Jr., their general manager, on earlier on in the year, and a lot has changed since then, but still a good kind of barometer of the expectation and outline of what that franchise is all about.
Yeah, that's an excellent point because they don't tend to change things all that much from one season to the next. There's a lot of stability there. John Ferguson has been there. Ferguson Jr. has been there for a while. Head coaching staff, those guys, when they get that job, they tend to stay there. It's a very good setup. It's a nice city. It's an hour away from Boston, and the eyes of the Boston Bruins management are always on you. I mean, anytime you go into Providence, you're going to see Boston management there taking in the game. Just a real top-notch setup that they've had there for years and years. And, in a lot of ways, they're kind of the real standard that was first set back in the 90s when the ECHL was a much different place. They've carried that through really all along. And they've had a few lean years over, going back to that 1992-93 first season with the Bruins. But for the most part, it's been a very successful affiliation. And this year looks like more of the same.
If we look at other teams who are streaking, there's not a lot of long streaks. And what I've found in my short time covering this league is that this time of year, whether you're in the playoff race or not, things get a lot tighter. The teams that had been pretty successful over the previous weeks and months tend to maybe hit a bit of a speed bump as the playoffs approach. And I think we're falling into that a little bit more now, where you've got lots of teams that have won 2 or maybe 3 in a row, but nobody, on the same level as Providence for sure. And then you've got the Binghamton Devils who have won 6 in a row, but they've just been on fire, since the Christmas break pretty much. And again, we're going to chat a bit more about them with Rob Lippolis coming up in just a few minutes. But do you find that too, Pat, that teams tend to really buckle down this time of year, regardless if they're in the playoff picture or not?
Yeah, that's one of the real interesting kind of aspects of the American Hockey League. Almost the first half of the season in a lot of cases is just teams kind of feeling their way through. In any given year, you're looking probably 40 to 60% of a team changes over from one season to the next. And it takes a while to get the systems down, to get the personnel down, to get the roles down. But the second half rolls around, teams start to find their way. And then just in time for that, the trade deadlines arrive. So you get another bit of upheaval. So it's a real, I guess I would use the word volatile time of the year in terms of where teams are at, their performance, their cohesion. And, within the next couple of weeks, if not sooner, we'll start having some of those guys coming out of the CHL, the NCAA, some guys that come over from Europe. So you get a whole nother influx of young players. And sometimes those guys are the real game breakers. You get your first round picks that are coming in. I think the most famous example of the American Hockey League is back in 2004-05. The Flyers, they had Mike Richards and Jeff Carter join what was then the Philadelphia Phantoms for the playoffs and come in there and just real dominant performances. And they went on to win the Cup that year.
Right.
It's not always that dramatic, but you can get some of those high-end guys that come in there really as kind of a stopover on their way to the AHL. Zach Werenski came in a few years ago for the Lake Erie Monsters, right as they were about to embark on a Calder Cup run. So it's a time of the year where it's even more difficult really to prognosticate where teams are and where they're going. And that's why, this league is, if the NHL is parity, then the AHL's parity times 10 because week to week the rosters change so much that you really don't know what you have. And the opponent you maybe faced a week or two ago that wasn't at their best now can all of a sudden be hitting their stride. So it's you really have to be ready every night, and especially now you get into these 3-and-3 weekends. Fatigue sets in, and really can kind of upset the apple cart a little bit. But a lot of teams right now are finding themselves in that win one, lose one type of situation. And it's been it can be a really difficult time of the year to make up ground.
Yeah, and if we look at who's been cold, the Belleville Senators have been one of those teams. They've only lost 2 in a row, but 6-4 in their last 10, and it's been a while since the North Division leaders were having so much trouble, let's say, or in such an inconsistent stretch where they weren't winning 3 at a time or 4 at a time and then losing 1. So that's one of them. You also go down to San Antonio and look at a 3-game losing streak there. They're also 6-4 in their last 10, and that's pretty well since returning home from their big road trip following the news of the team leaving town. So you wonder how much trickle-down effect that's having on things in San Antonio. And then the Toronto Marlies, they've only lost 1 in a row. Well, 1, but 3-7 in their last 10, and just dropping further and further and further out of the playoff picture, which is still such a strange thing for one of those teams that it seems like is always a guarantee to be there.
Yeah, they always are. They're on track right now to miss the playoffs for the first time since 2011, which in AHL terms is might as well be 30 years.
Yeah,
I mean, you don't generally see sustained runs of success like that at this level, just with the amount of turnover that you have from one season to next. But this has been a team that's really been in free fall, for the last 3 to 4 months, ever since Sheldon Keefe left. At that time, they were battling for first place and looking really good. And it's been a struggle ever since. They've not really gotten themselves on track. They've only had 12 wins, really, in almost the past 3.5 months, which is decidedly on Marlies-like, to say the least. But they're now 7 points out of the playoffs going into this week. They would have to climb past at least 3 different teams just to even hit that 4th place spot in the North Division, and that's probably the most attainable spot they're in right now. And the Binghamton Devils hold that spot, and they're just absolutely on fire right now. So unless Toronto can somehow start to really make up some ground here, starting with a game in Bridgeport this week, but then they go into Hershey, and that's obviously a tough spot to win, and they play the Lehigh Valley Phantoms. So they have the road, a real tough road cut out for them coming here, and then they arrive back home. They get the Rochester Americans, the Grand Rapids Griffins, Belleville, and then Grand Rapids again. So the schedule is not favoring the Toronto Marlies, and I think this is looking more and more like the year that the Marlies finally stumble. They won the Calder Cup in 2018, went back to the Eastern Conference Final last season, pushed Charlotte to 6 games, but this season's been a real tough fight for them, really ever since November. Greg Moore came in as the replacement head coach. Just hasn't worked out for him ever since he got there in terms of winning, and it's been kind of a merry-go-round in terms of goalies and just the overall team just has not been cohesive, and this definitely does not look like the Marlies that we're well accustomed to. Yeah,
another cold team, if you will, is the Cleveland Monsters, well out of the playoff picture, and so it's probably not worth dwelling on them a whole lot. I mean, I was in Cleveland last weekend with the Senators. Unbelievable building, let me just say, and perhaps one of the best game day experiences in the American Hockey League. But this team has just absolutely been decimated by injuries to some key guys, and moreover, Columbus was decimated with injuries to key guys, forcing a bunch of call-ups, and a lot of those guys not eligible to come back now, even if Cleveland was to make the playoffs. So I think at this point, the Monsters are kind of focusing on next year. But just to go back to San Antonio, Pat, do you think that the news and things like that are having an effect on the way that team is playing right now?
Yeah, and I do, and it's a shame because they had such a good road trip. They won 6 out of the 10 games, came back in pretty good shape, survived that road trip, which typically most seasons is what does them in. And then they come home and they just haven't been able to hit their stride. And that's a difficult situation to walk into. Just for one, you've been on the road now for the better part of a month. They were home for a bit, but in terms of actually playing a home game. And everything I've heard from the San Antonio fan base is I'm not sure it's so much anger from the fan base. It's just a little bit of apathy setting in, and just fans almost sort of starting to check out. It's sort of the mentality, well, you're leaving us. Well, okay, well, we're not so interested in you anymore. And especially for a team that's a 500 club that's not had a ton of success, it's easily understandable why the fan base might not be all in with that team, especially in a place like San Antonio. Warm spring weather comes pretty quickly there. And for a club that's not going to be around, beyond the end of this season, and certainly the nature that it went down in terms of the announcement, it's not all that surprising that the fan base there is more or less, I think, started to check out, and inevitably that affects the club because you're not getting that home ice advantage, you're not getting that support, and especially when you're in a playoff fight, you need every advantage you can get. So this is starting to look like another tough finish for San Antonio.
Yeah, and coming into the week, they're not in a bad spot. They've got a game at hand on the 4th place Chicago Wolves, 3 games in hand on the 5th place Rockford Ice Hogs, and they're only 2 points back. So a push could get them into the playoffs. And let's be honest, for the fans in San Antonio, I think that would mean a lot, at least to get one more ride in the postseason with those guys. And as we're going to talk about in a segment coming up in just a little bit, it's an interesting situation for these players now who, for the most part, are property of the St. Louis Blues, but there's going to be more of a move because the Blues affiliate is going to Springfield. So we'll touch on that a little bit later on and how that might be affecting things as well. So that's who's hot and who's not this week. Again, among the hot teams is the Binghamton Devils. They have jumped into a playoff position after being in the basement, really, of the American Hockey League's North Division for a good chunk of the season. We'll find out what led to the switch and talk about some of the fun initiatives they've been doing down in Binghamton, well, up in Binghamton, I suppose, depending on where you're listening. But when you're winning, it's a whole lot more fun. And Rob Lippolis, the voice of the Binghamton Devils, joins us next to talk a bit about how things are going there. It's Around the A on the Sports Podcasting Network, episode 19 of our first season here with David Foote and Patrick Williams. Time to head to Binghamton, where we'll talk about perhaps the hottest team in the American Hockey League over the second half of the campaign. The Devils are right in the thick of the North Division playoff race, and Rob Lippolis, the voice of the Devils, is with us on the line. Hey, Rob, how are you, man?
Hey, guys. How's it going?
Good. We haven't chatted in a while because it feels like it's been forever since the Devils and Senators played each other, which is rare. But let's talk a little bit about the overall affiliation between Binghamton and New Jersey. Obviously, this was a partnership that got struck when the Senators moved out this way. And I think, like Belleville, you guys have seen a lot of up and down between the NHL and the AHL clubs. How would you describe the affiliation overall?
It's been great so far. I mean, ever since they came into Binghamton, it was, hey, we're here to stay. We're here to make an impact on the community as well. They're big on community events as well. And then, not only that, but on the ice. And the first 2 seasons, when the affiliation changed, the Senators didn't make the playoffs for quite some time prior to leaving. So you get the new affiliation in, and then a couple of, tough years early on. But I think that you're starting to see a lot of the guys kind of coming on in that, in the draft picks, and that's great to see. We have, there's been times where there have been tons of draft picks in the lineup for the Devils, and that can be a good thing. And it can also, sometimes hurt you as well. But I think that, so far here, and you're starting to see everything kind of pay off right now. And it's been quite the turnaround since mid-December. And I know the fans are excited about it. And I think the biggest thing that we're seeing, here right now is how New Jersey fans are paying attention now. They're asking how they can watch games, how they can get tickets, stuff like that. So it's pretty cool to see it. And it's been fun to watch. And I think, one of the best things talking with, head coach Mark Dennehy is, they really wanted to work on defensive zone coverage and not just, defense. It's, okay, can the forward, I want the forward to, back checking aggressively, goaltending. Hey, let's get the puck out of the zone quick, out through center ice into the offensive zone. And we've seen that. I mean, it's been twofold. You're seeing guys, some of the back checks that we've seen, the small things that you look for in games has all improved. And it's been great here to see, and happy for the fans, happy for the players and everyone paying attention.
Yeah, it's been a while since a Binghamton team has got into the postseason. You're in the midst of that battle now. How has that kind of changed the focus around the team? Are more people starting to tune in? You mentioned like the Jersey fans are getting on board. Is that starting to rally people there a little bit?
Oh, totally. I mean, social media too. I mean, and because I help, we have Addie does all our social media, but on the road, we try and do a lot of stuff on the road to kind of not give the impression that we're on the road, but we are. And so I see all the comments and everything. And first half of the year, it was tough to log on. I won't lie, but ever since mid-December, there's so many. We just surpassed 30,000 followers on Twitter, and New Jersey's sharing things. The New Jersey Twitter account, they have, team reporters. Amanda Stein, I don't know if you follow her. She is a team reporter for New Jersey. She starts to share a ton of stuff, and we're getting a lot of traction, and it's fun. And I just hope that if they can get into the playoffs, obviously the hardest part is going to be getting in my mind. I think we could see a pretty good influx of New Jersey fans making their way to Binghamton.
Rob, you look at Mark Dennehy's an interesting background. 13 years at the college level, Merrimack. Then he was hired by the Pittsburgh Penguins actually 2 summers ago to coach in the ECHL. Actually never ended up there. Instead, Binghamton picked him off and put him, or I should say the Devils did that. What kind of growth have you seen from him in the last, year and a half as he adjusts to the pro game?
It's kind of tough to, even if I was to ask him, I think, you'd get a different answer maybe, but I think, in talking with him, it's the whole, the biggest adjustment. And if you think about it, it just kind of makes sense is, you don't have to worry about students and grades. You don't have to worry about recruiting. You got to worry about other things. And I think, one of the things too is, okay, these guys are pros, these guys are college kids. Okay. It's okay. You're going out as a team for a meal rather than, now in pros, okay, you're on your own for a meal. When to push them, when to not push them. And I think one of the things too, in talking with him is practices. He has brought up a lot, the length of practice at this time of the year. We just had 2 3-and-3s, and he brought up, mentioning the time of length of practice. The captains used they pulled their captain's card to get a day off this past week after a 3-and-3. So he's got incentives kind of going like that. So it's just, I think the biggest difference obviously is the age of the players. Not having to deal with recruiting and keeping 2.50 GPA and 12 credits in college. So.
That December turnaround, you're 26-9 since starting off. I think it was 17, 14, and 4. Obviously, this league is volatile many seasons, and you can see turnarounds. But this has been, I think, especially dramatic. You mentioned that back checking, that better commitment to defensive play. What else have you seen from this team? Kind of just on the ice, but also the mentality around the club as this winning has picked up.
Yeah, talking with Ryan Schmelzer, who was the AHL Player of the Week, getting a quote from him, he says he's having a blast. Everyone's having a blast. And I think that, I think that goes somewhat unnoticed where, the more fun you're having, I think it just translates everywhere. It translates to front office. It translates to, just being on the bus, in the lock, everything. It's one of the things that I have noticed is just how much, it's always fun, right? But it's more fun. Everyone's in a better mood. And I think that you talk about the small things like, I just mentioned, like getting the puck out of the zone quickly, getting the puck into the zone. I think one of the things that I've noticed the most is the amount of time they spend in the offensive zone. And it's working along the walls. It's keeping that defensive unit out there longer and then almost pouncing in a way. They're so good along the wall. They got a lot of big guys, Baddock, Bastian, McLeod, when Mikey's up in New Jersey. But when they're together, I mean, you throw that puck into the corner, it's like you're taking a punishing. And it's something, the offensive zone pressure, I think, is the biggest. If I could pick something, other than getting the puck out of the D zone quickly, but it's the amount of time they spend in the offensive zone, the amount of shots they're getting on net. You go back and look from that mid-December until now, how many times they've outshot teams, how many times they've had more than 35 shots on net. And that's something that, in the past 2 seasons, the shot differential was easily negative, 100, 200 at the end of the season. This is the first time that the shot differential has been a plus, and the goals as well. So that all attributes. And I think, getting goals like that and getting a lot of shots on net, the amount of time they've spent in the offensive zone has been really good. The forecheck too. And I mean, and I'm not just talking about, hey, let's pass the puck around and hold it along the wall and so on and so forth. This is, okay, they're bringing it out of the zone. Let's attack them as they're bringing it out of the zone. They force so many turnovers in the offensive zone as well. And that goes along with it too.
We're chatting with the voice of the Binghamton Devils, Rob Lippolis. You mentioned having fun, and obviously that comes a lot easier when the team is winning and playing as well as it has. You guys have done a lot of fun stuff off the ice as well. Perhaps most memorably, your Slapshot weekend when you and Jill Sen recreated that. Man, I was losing it when I saw that. It's one of the best things and perhaps one of the best executed theme nights that I've seen around. How well is that stuff going over, and how much more willing are the guys to get involved with that sort of thing given the state of the team right now?
I think, anytime you're winning, people are more willing to do things like that. But I think, it's when a team is losing, I think you need things like that more. And this is like from the, front office standpoint where, okay, maybe you're not doing so well on the ice. Let's come up with some fun stuff. Let's get fans laughing. Let's get fans, you got to counter, I guess. Winning is, not every team wins, right? So, but this was an idea we came up with where, okay, how many teams have done Slapshot weekends and brought the Hanson brothers out and everything, which is all fun. I love it. But we wanted to kind of do something different. So we had I was like, the Broome County Blades, they were the team, in Slapshot where the Hanson brothers made their debut. So that was something that we were able to take advantage of. We had the jerseys. We got guys to come out, not the Hansons. That's it's a little bit more money, but you get guys who are in the movie, right? The Dave Killer Carlson, he had a big role in the movie as well, and the captain is from the Chiefs, and they loved it. They're like, oh, this is great. We've never seen this before. And then ironically, we had a season ticket holder who was in the movie, right? So he's in the movie. And then he also was able to, not only was he in the movie, but he was the guy that kind of took that beating along the wall when the Hansons go in, all three of them, and they're just crushing this guy in the corner. That's kind of where that was him. And it was funny. We were able to do a thing on him. So it was fun all around.
Well, and because of that, we know that Jill Sen is a pretty good actor based on your little recreation scene with him.
I didn't even get into that. That was basically what that was. Sorry, I'm getting yelled at by the coach here. We got to hop on the bus here shortly, but that was something that was pretty last minute, and it was awesome to see.
Well, maybe we'll just get one more question, and then looking ahead to the playoff push here. What's the belief like amongst that group that they can get in, and what do they have to do to get into that last spot in the competitive North Division here?
Yeah, that's going to be the hardest part is getting in. And I think, obviously with New Jersey not being in the playoffs, I think that if they can get in and get all these guys back, I think they can make a pretty good run. You don't want to use the word they've kept it together, but I know like in Belleville, you've had so many roster moves even last year too, and you're able to kind of keep it together and keep winning. So that's the big thing. If they can get in, I think they can make a pretty good run through the playoffs. And hey, it's and as well, it's all about getting hot at the right time.
That's it.
And I think they have been getting hot at the right time.
They certainly have. Rob Lippolis is the voice of the Binghamton Devils. You can find him on Twitter at Rob Lippolis. We're going to have you back again, man, to get into some of the prospects and things like that, but we know you got to go catch the bus. So thanks for squeezing us in.
Yeah, no problem. Hey, guys, we'll see you soon.
Episode 19 of Season 1 of Around the A with David Foote and Patrick Williams on the Sports Podcasting Network continues. Thanks to Rob Lippolis for his time. And again, you can find him on Twitter at Rob Lippolis. And for my money, Pat, one of the guys in this league in the play-by-play position that's doing some of the best work social media-wise. The guy's cutting highlights mid-game. He's acting in videos with players to provide more content. Rob's doing an excellent job there in his third season as the voice of the Binghamton Devils. And, yeah, we will try to get him back on again, maybe when he's at home, not on the road and not being chased to the bus.
Yeah, no, it's good to see Rob. Rob has been through some lean years there in Binghamton and going back to the Senators and then the Devils. So for him to have an opportunity here to call a playoff stretch drive race, great for him. Rob's one of the nicest people you'll meet in hockey, and like you said, a real hard worker. And he has a chance if that team can squeak in. I mean, that building can be a tough place to play, especially in the playoffs. And it'd be fun to see that team start to have some success again, because there's been a lot of really rough years, between both affiliations for those fans there. Ever since they won the Calder Cup back in 2011, there hasn't been a whole lot to cheer for since. So it's a fun ride watching this club. What a dramatic turnaround to go from what they were, basically a team winning 1 out of every 3 games, to now a team winning 3 out of every 4 games. So it just goes to show you this league, as you've said so many times, is one of streaks. But this is quite the streak they've been on for the better part now of 3 months.
Yeah, and we'll get him back on to talk about some of the individuals that are making things happen. For now, we'll turn to our American Hockey League headlines, and the first thing we're going to talk about is not just a headline in the American Hockey League, not just a headline in the world of hockey, or the world of sports for that matter, but all around the world. And the coronavirus outbreak that originated in Wuhan, China, and is making its way around. And there's some people who are panicking about this, and that's not what we want to do. We don't want to incite any panic. I think from a news perspective, and where I spend the other chunk of my days, it's about being aware without overreacting. So let's look at some of the reactions that we're seeing specifically in sports. The first being that locker rooms are going to be closed to media for post-game interviews. Did you think that was a necessary thing? Do you think it'll make a difference at all, either A, on the transmission of the virus, or B, on the work of media?
Well, I mean, I'm certainly not a biologist by any stretch, but I don't think it hurts. The less, some of those NHL media scrums, especially in places like Toronto, Montreal, places like that, Winnipeg, I remember for sure, where you're 5 or 6 people deep sometimes, and everybody's kind of elbows in each other's ribs and just very much in each other's space. So I think, if you can not have that, to me, I think it's an easy decision. I know a lot of people in the media have their backup about that, but you're obviously in a very difficult situation here. It's in some ways unprecedented, at least in most of our lifetimes. And in terms of the general overall sacrifices that people have made or may have to make in the future, it seems like a pretty small one to make. And I think especially in the American Hockey League, most places, I think, especially if you're dealing with the visiting team, it's outside of the dressing room anyway. Right. And for me, that's fine. I prefer not to be in the room, quite frankly. It's just tighter working quarters. You're in their way. It's noisy. A lot of times the rooms, especially the visiting rooms, are really small. So it's just not very conducive to a good interview. And, sometimes the players are a little bit on the younger side. So you get one of their buddies kind of teasing them that they're being interviewed. So I much prefer actually just doing it out in the hallway and doing it that way. So I think it's fine. I'm not sure how much it will help, but I don't think it will hurt in terms of possibly preventing things. But as you said, it's just, there probably needs to be some moderation because, if you really start to sit down and do a mental inventory of all the different interactions you'll have during a day and the people you'll meet and the door handles that you'll go through or that you'll use, you could almost really start to, play games with your head. So I think this is a case where the hockey world is in a lot of ways just following the lead of the greater world at large. And, there'll be some probably missteps along the way as people start to figure things out. But, I don't know where this is going. This is a strange one. This is a situation where if you look at Europe now, the German league and then the Austrian league both have canceled their seasons. No playoffs, nothing. Shut it down. Everyone go home. IHF has canceled various different international tournaments. I think the big question is if the World Championship is next on the chopping block. It's not great. And, I think we'll know a lot more from everyone I talk to who's a lot more knowledgeable about this stuff. Probably we'll know more in the next week to 10 days, just how much of a hold this is going to have. But if you look around the world, it's not good right now. And, I'm not sure how much more this could really expand and start to really maybe even threaten the entire season.
Yeah, and I think to finish the thought on the no media in the locker room thing, Kev Laramie, who's the big guy here with the Sports Podcasting Network, is also the president of the North American Soccer Reporters Association, and he and I were chatting the other day about what kind of problems that could cause as far as fair coverage of teams, if you will. And I kind of pointed out to him that especially here in Belleville, we do everything outside the room. Home team, road team, doesn't matter. We've been in the room a full one time, opening night in 2017. Other than that, there's no real need to be in there, I find, if you can, ask for who you need and get them. And that's kind of what I said to him, was that I think until it gets to a point where teams stop granting requests or start, making it seem like guys are ducking interviews and things like that, then I think it becomes a problem. But I think as long as teams are open to bringing guys out and bringing out whoever the media wants to speak to, things will be fine. Because I've also been in rooms I'll use Ottawa as the example, where by NHL mandate, the room is open 15 minutes after the buzzer, but you go in and there's only 3 guys in there, and everybody else is cleared out, and they've already decided who is going to speak that night. So, which is also fine, because again, if you make a request, they'll get you who you need. But I think it's not going to be an issue as far as the coverage goes until and if that starts happening, where teams aren't bringing you who you want to speak to.
I can't tell you how many times, especially in the NHL, you walk into a room and it's like you and the media, and you're all just sort of staring at each other like, now what? Because the room is entirely empty, other than the equipment guys and maybe some random staff. But it's a little different, I think, in the last 10, 15 years, because, a lot of these new facilities have separate quarters for players. They can kind of go off and duck out of their main room. And that's where you have to rely on your PR staff to be helpful. And, it is always possible guys can duck. I mean, nobody's really has to talk. I mean, yes, there's the access rule, and but there's always ways around it. Oh, so-and-so is getting treatment. So-and-so is meeting his family, da-da-da-da-da. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think you have to write it out, and that's where, if your PR staff is good, and for the most part, most teams are at least decent. There are a few bad clubs at different levels that are not very helpful. Personally, at this stage of my career, I'm usually able to work around them. So I tend to not worry too much about them. But it's just a situation where you just have to go with the flow a little bit. There's people out there that are going to be making a lot bigger sacrifices than this. And I agree with you. If it turns into sort of an excuse for teams to hide players or really cut media access down, then I think, there's an issue there. But for right now, I mean, frankly, if I never go in another dressing room, that's fine with me. I think anybody that's been in there, I mean, they're not the most conducive environment. First of all, it's about, 1,000 degrees in there, and with the shower going and the steam coming out, and all the
smells kind of bad.
Stinks. Oh my God. I mean, I don't really miss that too much. And it's fine. I mean, really, I think we're all making a bigger deal of it than it really needs to be made.
And I think most reporters know that you get your better stuff probably on practice days or outside of post-game scrums and things like that. So lots more to get to here. So maybe we'll leave the coronavirus thing just on the last point of the San Jose Sharks now being told that they have to play with 1,000 people or less in their building. If this becomes a bigger thing, if more communities start limiting these big events, I think that's where we're really going to see some issue and some impact on this league.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The San Jose Barracuda, they have 2 games left scheduled as of now for March 17th and the 22nd that are not looking like they will happen. I think fortunately for San Jose, I mean, for one thing, they're out of the playoff race, number one. Number two, they've played most of their home schedule already, 2 games in March, 2 in April, and then that's it for the season. So if you're the Barracuda, you'll be able to work around that for the most part. But, I think, especially in this league, I'm not sure how well closing the building would work just in terms of teams at this level. Obviously, it's not a league where you're just swimming in money, and you need to really bring in every dollar you can make through ticket sales, concessions, parking, the whole 9 yards. And if you're not bringing that revenue in, you're getting in a really difficult spot. But I think when all's said and done, the NHL or the AHL will follow the NHL's lead. And if that's what it comes down to, well, then I guess we'll have to cross that bridge at that time. But if it can happen in Germany and in Austria and the international tournaments, I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility that could happen here. So we'll have to just keep an eye on this thing. This thing is a challenge, I think, for everybody. And you're even seeing teams like the Hershey Bears and Rockford now where they are canceling public events. Usually teams like to do community events, meet and greets with players. Maybe you have a player or two come out and sign autographs at a restaurant. Well, that's not happening now for those clubs. So it's, in some cases, I think, is it maybe a little bit too much? Yeah, possibly. But, on the other hand, there's not a great playbook for this. And teams and the leagues as a whole are just, I think, having to feel their way through this.
Yeah, the key is, again, like I said, to acknowledge that it's going around, to try not to overreact, and to do the best we can to be preventative. And I think in the long run, that's what all of these sports leagues and these teams are trying to do is err on the side of caution. And that's why some of these decisions are being made. Of course, we'll continue to follow that here on Around the A. Let's look at one of the other big headlines, and we mentioned it earlier on in the show with the San Antonio Rampage move to Vegas. The St. Louis Blues lose an affiliate. Well, they've got one, and I don't know if it's who we necessarily expected it would be, but they're going to join up with the Springfield Thunderbirds, and that now puts the Florida Panthers out in the middle of nowhere as far as having an affiliate. So, first of all, let's get some reaction on the move to Springfield, and then we'll talk about perhaps the options for the Chicago Wolves and the Florida Panthers.
Yeah, this is quite the plot twist. You think back to the ECHL All-Star game at the end of January, things were more or less pretty calm. And then that's Las Vegas San Antonio deal went down, and that really set off a domino effect that left the St. Louis Blues for the second time since 2017 having to find a new affiliation. They were not happy with that, to say the least. They've managed to cobble together a deal here with the Springfield Thunderbirds. I don't think it's an ideal situation for either side. St. Louis has had some up and down AHL clubs over the years. But at least for now, they'll finally avoid the situation that they found themselves in back in 2017-18, where they had to scatter their players around the league. The real complicating factor in all this now is that you're matched out at 32 clubs, both at the NHL and the AHL levels. So it really is a 1-to-1 ratio, and it makes it difficult to have a lot of options, especially if you want to be anywhere near close to home. This is geographically not a great fit, obviously, for St. Louis and Springfield. An Eastern Conference AHL club with a Western Conference NHL club. It makes player recalls a little more complicated, but it became very clear that the St. Louis Blues did not want any part of renewing their affiliation ties with the Chicago Wolves. They've been together for 4 years. That ended in 2017. Did not end on positive note, I think, to say the least. So both clubs really, I think, went out of their way to avoid that. But now that leaves the Chicago Wolves. They're going to be without a parent club, at least as of the moment, as well as the Florida Panthers. So, yeah, this league, just when you think things were settling down a little bit, there's a real plot twist coming out of left field. Apparently that whole Vegas deal with San Antonio came together really quickly. And really, I think, caught St. Louis by surprise. It certainly caught the San Antonio staff by surprise. And it's really had a ripple effect all across the league, all the way up even into Springfield.
And it's made everybody really have to jump to find fixes because, I mean, this season ends in, a month and a half or less, and then you've got the playoff run. And for a lot of teams that are not going to go deep, you got to start looking ahead to next year. And San Antonio, Springfield, could be those teams, really, when it comes down to it. Both are on the bubble right now. And need to look ahead. Does it become a default now that like Chicago and Florida are going to team up? Like you said, we're maxed out. Is there anything else that can be done, or are they kind of in a spot right now where you think that come next season they're going to have to at least bite the bullet and do it for a year and see what happens?
Yeah, it's a difficult situation. Chicago, they have a certain way of doing things that they like to do, and that doesn't always sit well with certain NHL clubs. They've been through a number of affiliations. They were with the Atlanta Thrashers up until 2011 when they went to Winnipeg. Then they partnered with Vancouver for 2 seasons, then St. Louis for 4, and then the Vegas Golden Knights for the past 2 seasons plus here. So this is another change on the horizon for the Chicago Wolves. The natural inclination or I think assumption would be that you'll see the Chicago Wolves and the Florida Panthers pair up, but I would caution fans to not jump to conclusions. I would say keep an eye on the Carolina Hurricanes affiliation. See, they're currently with the Charlotte Checkers, but there's rumblings that I've heard and I've confirmed that there's a possibility of a change there, and we'll have to see. I think it's a matter of what is the NHL parent club looking for. Some clubs like a very hands-off approach where they just want a place to stash a few prospects and then kind of let the AHL club handle the rest. Other teams want much more of a hands-on approach. So in some ways, the Chicago Wolves can be a good fit if you're it's almost the difference between being a renter and a buyer. If you just want to put your players there and let them take care of it, that's fine. But, where it can get a little difficult is when the NHL club expects to have the final say on things, and then the AHL club doesn't always go along with that. So there's some friction. But I think for right now, you're kind of in a little bit of a holding pattern as the musical chairs game continues. But that's where I would advise fans. Keep an eye on the Charlotte, Carolina affiliation, and then obviously the Florida Panthers and the Chicago Wolves as well.
And this may be a silly question, but maybe it doesn't happen this year, but do you think there's any chance that in the future the Board of Governors gets together and maybe they chat with the NHL clubs and just say, hey, anybody interested in trading or swapping affiliations for a deal that might make more sense both ways? Is that far too complicated of a thing to make happen?
Well, I mean, it is difficult just in the sense of you have business agreements, but you also have a lot of personal relations. Certain teams like to work with certain other general managers and vice versa. So it can be difficult that way. I mean, that was a huge part of what Dave Andrews' job was really for the past 25 years was a lot of matchmaking and trying to bring teams together and find fits where maybe they existed and sometimes even where they didn't exist and they had to be created. So I think it's a situation where if I had to put money on this, I don't expect that in the next 2 or 3 years that all the pieces are in place for now. I mean, the emphasis on geographical location and convenience has not subsided by any stretch, even with these recent developments. And I think if you're the St. Louis Blues, you just wanted to find a safe landing spot for right now. It's a 5-year deal, so it gives them a little bit of time. Now, 5-year deals in this league tend to not necessarily be written in stone in some cases. But if you're the St. Louis Blues and you're Springfield, it gives both sides a chance to just catch their breath, reassess things, and then go from there. And Springfield's been a pretty dependable member of this league for a long time, one of the real senior cities in this league. Home of the league office. So I think for right now, if you're the St. Louis Blues, put your players there, you reassess down the road, see how you like this fit. If it works, great. If not, you'll look elsewhere. But, it's a little bit of a throwback in some ways, having the non-geographically proximate affiliation. Really, the Utica Comets are really the only team with the Vancouver Canucks that truly fit that bill where you're going really, really long distance. So, there's a few other clubs, obviously Syracuse and Tampa Bay are a bit far apart. But this is a situation where I think for right now it's a holding pattern, and then they'll reassess down the road.
All right, we're going to get to Gerry Cantlon in Hartford in just a moment, but lastly, let's talk a little bit about officiating, because there's an interesting story that's been shaping up over the last, let's say 3 weeks maybe, perhaps a little bit more than that, where we've seen kind of a rash of officials' retirements. A lot of longtime American Hockey League, specifically linesmen, working their final games and being recognized for the work they've done over, in some cases, 20 seasons or more. And it's catching, we talked about this, away from the show this week, and it seems to be catching a lot of people by surprise. And the big head scratcher is that, hey, why are you getting rid of all these veteran officials right before the playoffs are going to start and you need them? But I don't think there's a real official answer, although we've heard some rumblings as to, what might be going on.
Yeah, I mean, the last number of years has been a real topsy-turvy time for officiating in this league in general. There was the push to get the 2-referee system in place, so that caused kind of a run on officials, and they've had to do that program where they recruit former pro players, junior players to look into officiating and to start. So you're seeing some guys that have not had a whole lot of experience doing playoff games in this league already, and it used to be a much slower road for officials. They spent a long time in this league before they really were able to be a senior official. Well, now you're in the league a year or two and you're taking playoff games, and it's just a much different road in a lot of ways. And so that was the first thing. The second factor was, in the past, let's say, decade or so, there's been a number of retirements among officials at the NHL level, and that's obviously a trickle-down effect, and that comes down and ends up if you're the American League, a number of your officials are pulled up to the NHL, and those spots have to be filled somehow. So and then just I think the third factor is the NHL has the way they want to do things. The NHL and the AHL just renewed their officiating agreement this season, so I think there's just a real push here to get a little bit more NHL influence in the officiating program for the American Hockey League. And I think this is the ramifications of that. By my count, it's been 16 linesmen that have announced their retirements. A lot of cases seemingly effective immediately within the past month or so. So it's a little bit unprecedented in a lot of ways. And, I do understand where fans are coming from when they're thinking, okay, where are we going to get all these officials to replace these guys? But the NHL has that development program that they're really pushing pretty hard. And I would expect that that's where you'll see a lot of those linesmen and even some referees start to come from to replace some of these departed linesmen.
And if you take a look in the press box or scout area in most rinks, most nights there's somebody from the NHL officiating department who's there keeping an eye on things. So they're obviously making a pretty concerted effort to develop officials that way. It in all honesty, might be making things tougher for some American League teams and players by, being tossed inexperienced officials, even in regular season games. And we've seen it a bunch, even here in Belleville and in some other places. But the end of the day, that's the way it goes. You need to develop officials, and they got to start somewhere. And obviously, mandating time in, let's say, the Ontario Hockey League or somewhere else isn't going to get these young officials to the point that NHL officiating wants them to be at. So this is where they start.
Yeah, this is it's classic AHL. This is kind of the lab where a lot of the work has to happen, and just like players have to develop and make mistakes, and goalies and coaches and everyone else. Well, the same is true for linesmen and referees, and it's really no way around that. And that's the unfortunate reality, I think, for fans and for teams, that you're going to have to some extent live with these mistakes that officials make. It's obviously anybody that's officiated either hockey or any other sport, really. I mean, it's a difficult job in the best of times, and especially if you're a young up-and-coming official trying to learn or find your footing at this level. It's difficult. So there's unfortunately for all sides, it's a little bit of a pinch right now in terms of the supply. But when you're having a 32 team league that's expanded coast to coast. That puts a real strain on the system, and those referees, they have a tough job in this league. They do the 3-and-3s, except they don't get on a bus after the game and ride to the next city. They get in the car and have to make the drive themselves. So it's a tough road for those guys. I mean, you really, if you want to make the NHL as an official, you really have to want it badly. And unfortunately, I think for all of us, we have to sometimes live with those mistakes.
Absolutely. So that's another developing story. Lots of developing stories here on Around the A this week, and we'll be sure to follow up on those in the weeks ahead. For now, speaking of classic American Hockey League, we'll talk to one of the longtime guys who has covered this league, Gerry Cantlon, out in Hartford. We'll get up-to-date thoughts on the Wolf Pack and maybe get his thoughts as well on this whole coronavirus thing and not letting media in locker rooms and things of that nature. So Gerry Cantlon coming up here on episode 19 of Around the A. Time to check in on Hartford with our pal Gerry Cantlon, who's been on the show a couple times with us already. Veteran reporter covering the Hartford Wolf Pack and things of the nature of the New York Rangers. Thanks for doing this again, Gerry. How's things?
Oh, things are doing well. We're hanging in, getting over a little cold. Fine. Everything is okay, and happy to be back with you guys.
It's pretty well par for the course, I think, everywhere. If you hang out at the rink, you probably are a little sick right now. I'm battling through one, too. Speaking of illness, kind of going to bring me to my first question. Obviously, all this news going around about the coronavirus and things affecting sports teams, and in particular the AHL. As a veteran reporter, was curious to get your reaction to the news about locker rooms being closed and potentially empty arenas, and just kind of how this whole thing is affecting the world of sports in the AHL.
It's certainly a whole new uncharted territory, Dave and Patrick, to be able to think about this. Personally, I think things are a little overboard. I think people are overreacting. I do think people should be cautious. Certainly, practice, the safety things as far as, washing hands and taking those sort of precautions are excellent ideas. If areas are heavily affected or you're seeing a spike and rise in the virus, it would make prudent sense. I think the general overall reaction is pretty, maybe just a little too much of overreaction at this point. We're not in Wuhan, China. We're here. There are some cases, and we do have to take things seriously, but I think there has to be a balance. And I think that right now may be missing a little bit. But I will say it's probably one of the stranger things in hockey that Wayne Gretzky was used as a talking point during the National Coronavirus Task Force press conference today. Dr. Anthony Fauci cited Gretzky's famous line about going to where the puck should be, and he used it as an analogy that they want to go where the virus is. So we've hockey finds its way in every facet, it seems, and I just hope that everything can come to a head soon, and we get back to enjoying our lives and enjoying the things that please us all, such as hockey.
Yeah, but before we get to some of what's happening in Hartford, do you think the move to limit media from dressing rooms is going to make a big difference? Because I've heard, some reporters claim that it's going to affect how their coverage is done and things of that nature. But to me personally, it doesn't seem like that big a deal.
I can understand that there are certain, limitations that you're looking at and trying to be cautious. I mean, just on my own personal level, recently, obviously, if I mentioned I've had a upper chest respiratory infection. Certainly, I sound a heck of a lot better than I did a week ago, I can assure you guys. So I was always careful with the players. Just little fist bumps. You try to do things, again, being cautious and prudent. Can it affect reporting, Dave and Patrick? Possibly. That certainly can be an issue, but again, everything is in the broad scope of trying to limit exposure. I mean, as we all know, playoff, player locker rooms are breeding grounds. It happens. A lot of people close proximity. Guys are working out, sweating, excreting fluids. It's a breeding ground. There's no question about it. So I think, in part, that's kind of good. And again, it goes back to even some overreaction here in the state of Connecticut, where I live. The state's governing body for high school just today announced that they're canceling all winter sports championships, basketball and hockey. Nobody gets to play for a championship. That's really sad, and I think that's not a good thing. When it comes from a professional level, everybody has to make a decision. If you look at San Jose in the NHL, they're worried because of their proximity and the fact that there has been a spike in cases within California. So they certainly want to be careful about things. That's understandable. It's going to be weird, the concept that you might have, an AHL San Jose game with no crowd, or even an NHL game in San Jose. They're expecting one on March 19th. At this point, it looks like they have to make some decisions, and that's a tough thing. Season ticket holders, sponsorships, all get affected too. So it's a real balancing act right now. That is, no pun intended, a very fluid situation, and everybody's going to have to, make different decisions and have to roll with the punches, as they say.
Gerry, switching over to the hockey side, the on-ice aspect of matters. Hartford now in a real tough spot, lost 4 of their past 5, had a difficult weekend, losing back-to-back games against the Hershey Bears. What's the state of this team right now? Where do you see this team going for the next month or so, a team that had so much promise early in the season?
It was looking really good, and they've been riding the wave pretty well, but they've definitely hit a wall recently. They've had some difficulties, and there's a lot of factors involved with why the team has slipped a bit in the standings. Remember, when Hershey's playing outstanding hockey, they now lead the division. They have 81 points. Providence also is playing well. They're at 80. Then you've got Hartford right there, 73. So why has there been such a switch? Well, I think in part it's the lack of scoring. Hartford's really had a great difficulty. Over those 2 games with Hershey, the first game, 1-0 game, outstanding hockey game. Really one of the better NHL games I've seen all season. Very well played by both teams. It's going to be one of those, lucky goals. Somebody gets a good shot, and, Ed Witchwell definitely had one and got it. That was a goal, but it was a great game. Second game was a lot different. It was 4-1. But the second period, Hartford really, dropped the ball. It wasn't good. Their captain, Stephen Fogarty, was not happy after the game. Really let kind of loose. That you could see it on the bench after the first goal. That guys were already, sulking, kind of folding the tent after 1 goal. This has been building for a while, and I think one of the bigger things is just a lack of scoring that they're getting from some of their biggest players right now. When you look at it, a Fogarty, good hardworking captain, 1 goal in 14 games. Danny O'Regan, 1 goal in 10. Vitaly Krasov, high prospect, 1 goal in 14 games. That's tough. They also lost some players. That Joey Keane was traded to Charlotte. Bill DiCiuseppe was recalled to the Rangers. Booney Evans, who had 12 points in 10 games at one point, has now played only 1 game in 15. So you can see where the real problems exist for the Wolfpack is right there. Their primary scorers are not scoring. And that's an issue that their head coach, Chris Knobloch, mentioned to me last week. And it really is, evident. And it was evident again on Sunday when they lost 4-1. So they only had 4 goals over their last 4 games. Very, very difficult going into tomorrow night's game against Providence. They got to, right the ship pretty quickly because everybody is right behind them, as well as, Charlotte has been playing very well. They've really done a good job. They got themselves 69 points, and Springfield's not far behind either. They're still at 65, so things are very tight. They've got to right that ship pretty quickly.
Life after Igor Shesterkin, obviously called up about 2 months ago. How has the team adjusted, kind of the mental mindset from having that guy that was such a dependable goaltender back there to really cover up a lot of mistakes, and now you don't have that. Now you have JF Berube and Adam Huska. What sort of shift, if any, have you seen from the players in Hartford?
They've tried to do their best, I think, Patrick and David, in handling this. It's tough. There's no question. You look at the records since Igor Shishorkin left. They're now 10, 11, and 9. Not good since he's left. So they certainly have struggled. After him, he was so good because not only his save ability, but his ability to handle the puck, be that extra guy, had a great command and control of the game. He was like a field general. He really was the way he could be able to operate a game. Adam Huska is a good young rookie, but he has those games that any young rookie is going to have. I think he's played pretty well on Sunday, quite frankly. That 4-1 score in Springfield could have been a lot worse without him. Shea Perubi, really good guy, long veteran, strong record background. Right now, things haven't gone as well as he would have liked. 1-5, not what he was looking for in starting here. And they acquired him because of his experience, particularly winning the Calder Cup in Manchester, the last AHL team in Manchester, before they moved to Ontario, when the Pacific Division was born. So it's been kind of tough, but it's hard to also pin it on them as well. You have to have goaltender. You got to have goal support. And if you have no goal support, your goaltender can do a lot. It can only do so much. You got to be able to put the biscuit in the basket, as they say. And right now, I think that equilibrium right now has not been fully met by the Wolf Pack at this point. That they haven't been able to get that sequence. That I think once they do, I think that they'll be able to get themselves back in a stronger position in the standings, Pat.
Another young Russian, Vitaly Kravtsov, a 9th overall pick. You mentioned him earlier. It's been a difficult year for him in a lot of ways. He went back to Russia, then returned. What are you seeing from him lately as he tries to figure out this game here in North America?
I still think he's making the adjustment. I still think it's difficult. He is, 19 years old. You got to remember that, 20, I should say. And he's really got to, he's still making that adjustment. There is a real learning curve to coming here. It is a different hockey game, and I still think he's, trying to find his way. And right now, he's not doing as well as he would like, I'm sure, or as good as the Rangers. But they still have high hopes of them. I happened to speak with Jed Ortmeyer, the director of player development, on Sunday, and he said, "Hey, you got to remember these guys are still young, they're still learning. You can't, you got to take everything, as comes. He certainly would like to see greater production. He'd like to have some. So." He's just part of, I think, an overall mosaic issue right now as far as the scoring, as I've mentioned. But it's also been an organizational, because not only of him, remember, Elias Anderson, since we last chatted, has disappeared and headed back over to Sweden. That was not expected, but he's the third player, was a draft choice, who decided to lead the team. But this is a little different. He put it on his team and went back to Sweden, where he's playing now for Skellefteå AIK in the Swedish Hockey League. And I think that that's a very, different issue. Vitaly, he was young, learning stuff. He went over, kind of realized, obviously, it wasn't working the way like over there. Came back, so he's within the good graces, and you can give people a mulligan, as they say, to get themselves back on track. Anderson's situation is much different, where he just left his team and quit on them and demanded a trade. And if you notice, he hasn't been traded. And you look, for example, that hasn't worked out with a lot of people in the position. Look at Joshua saying. He thought he could ask Lou Lamoriello to trade him at his beck and call. That did not work out for him. He skated at Father David Bauer Arena in Toronto for 2 months before he came back to play, and was reassigned to San Antonio at the AHL trade deadline. So, sometimes you got to know where your space is in life, and I think those things. I think these young players are learning. They're a different breed than they were from 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. Their expectations are high, but if you have expectations that are high, performance is expected as well. So it's still, as they say, work in progress, Pat.
All right, this week the Rangers they signed one of the top college free agents, Patrick Kodorenko. But the New York pipeline has some possibilities beyond that. Tyler Wall, Morgan Barron, Keandre Miller, all in the college ranks right now. Who are the possibilities that you might see coming out of college, joining the Rangers, and then eventually find themselves with Hartford?
Keandre Miller's name has come up often. That is a good chance that he may be coming out at Wisconsin from the Badger program as a sophomore, but that's still to be determined, because one of the things is the Rangers are a very top-heavy organization defensively. They had 17 signed defensemen to start the season. So that's a big logjam. And they moved Brady Shea, part of the trade deadline. Now that the cap has been extended, that looks to be next year, that'll be between 84 and 88 million. There's a little more room to move on defense, but we still have some players and contracts that have to be looked at. So Miller is one. Katarenko is a very good pickup. There's a pickup of defenseman Zach Kakari from Brown University was signed, and Michael O'Leary from Notre Dame was signed as a forward. So there's been a lot of scouting at the collegiate rank to figure things out. Morgan Barron's an interesting situation. He is very highly liked by the Rangers. He has the size, the skill, very smart player, goes to Cornell, and Cornell, of course, is currently the number one ranked team in the country, college hockey, and they would like to win the national championship. But a good college source explained to me that Morgan Barron changed his major this year. That does not bode well for he's changing his major in his sophomore season, that he intends to be leaving school. Getting this degree is a very big key for him. And a lot of guys who do go to either Ivy League schools or top-ranked colleges are always looking to get that degree. They've worked hard to get to that position, want to be able to use it. But you have the lure, obviously, NHL money, and the Rangers wanting getting a big center down the middle. With Bunievas currently with his injury issues and upper body that is sidelined, they're starting to look at do we have somebody down the middle who can be able to, fill in those shoes, step in and become that younger player developing. So they're pushing hard. They're also scouting, ironically, his younger brother Justin, who plays with Halifax in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, but he's been sidelined by a blood clot 2 months. So there's always a good thing to try to induce somebody to come out. Hey, well, we're looking at your brother, and that isn't uncommon in hockey. That family members are either hired or in this case, players being looked at being drafted has happened. Remember, look at Jimmy Vesey. His younger brother had been drafted by the Toronto Maple Leafs, Nolan Vesey. And that was part of those whole sweepstakes a couple of years ago. Those are part of the arts of the business. Tyler Wall, I think, will be a member of the Wolf Pack as soon as the University of Mass Wolf season is ended. The Rangers are definitely putting a high priority in signing him. He's had an outstanding year. It's his senior season, one of the top, goaltending prospects in the country. But he does have this unique thing. He can become a UFA because he is now a senior. He's above 21 years of age, so therefore, he's free and clear. So, the Rangers have a short window of opportunity. The offer they make to him, Tyler Wall will take it. And as General Meyer said to me the other day, you can never have enough good goaltending. So that'll be an interesting particular one to watch as we're heading down toward the stretch run of the regular season.
And just want to get one more thought from you, Gerry, on a broader storyline around the AHL. The announcement that Springfield would be affiliating with St. Louis next year, and that leaves Florida kind of out in the mix. What's the reaction to that, and what kind of effect do you think this is going to have on perhaps some other affiliations around the league?
This is Patrick and I were talking off the air, and it looked like this was going to be a nice, quiet year. Not much was going to happen. We were having the new commissioner and CEO, with Dave Andrews stepping aside after 26 years, and seamless transition. And lo and behold, the last 6 weeks has turned into which tech chair and who's moving and going to be where has really erupted here. Obviously, St. Louis coming to Springfield is a big thing. They lost their team. The San Antonio Rampage was purchased by the Vegas Golden Knights, who decided to end their affiliation/partnership in Chicago with the Wolves early, and then purchase an existing AHL team and move them to Vegas, which they intend to do. It's been approved by the American Hockey League Board of Governors. They'll be in the Orleans Arena next year. And then they're going to be playing in a brand new building that's currently being constructed called the Lifeguard Arena, being constructed on the old Henderson Civic Center Convention Center. So this is a big deal. that, that's further solidifying the Western expansion of the American Hockey League by going to Vegas. For St. Louis, I mean, their relationship and many people's relationship with the Chicago Wolves has not been easy. There have been 4 affiliations in the last 8 years. Not been happy times. I guess the old adage, some play well with others, than not. And that's St. Louis was not heading back to Chicago. So coming east is a bit of a different thing. The agreement with Florida was up. They were negotiating, last I had heard, that, Florida and Springfield were talking about what to do. Well, this opportunity has presented itself, and many people must realize when Florida was moved to Springfield, it was not at their original suggestion. This was kind of very inside baseball, and they had to go there. They weren't very happy, but they were there. But now it pretty much looks like they're likely to head to Charlotte and be replacing the Carolina Hurricanes, which is the more interesting part of all of this. Changes is that the Carolina Hurricanes are going to become the affiliate of the Chicago Wolves, and in part because the owner of the Carolina Hurricanes believes he's spending too much money on prospects that are not going to be playing for the Carolina Hurricanes. He wants to focus on paying for the prospects the teams have. And Chicago wants to have a more, they want a competitive veteran team and want a team that wins. And that's their mantra with the Chicago Wolves. They've been a very successful franchise, but it flies a little bit in the face of the developmental concept that now is the American Hockey League. So it's a big switch. There's no question, Dave. It caught a lot of people by surprise. Having to make the changes. And, Dave Andrews, as he's stepping out of the American Hockey League, has taken a bit of a page out of AAA baseball. Baseball is different than hockey in the minor league sense that when you buy a team in minor league baseball, you have the team. You're in, you get the affiliation about who's left from the stock. It's always been a little different in the American League. They try to marry everybody geographically. That's been the big thing because of the CBA over the last few years. But this was a little different, and now that they really like the Charlotte market, a lot of work was done to redo the Bojangles Arena. So I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 to $15 million was done to really put that arena, together to make it as a hockey arena. They've done very well, and they've been very well received. So they didn't want to lose that market. So in that regards, I can understand, and it's just part of the changing, fabric and dynamic of the mosaic of the American Hockey League. It's they're no longer in Cape Breton and St. John's and Moncton and even Lowell and Adirondack, and it's really is a changing league. And you think of small leagues like at Cape Breton, Pat and I were talking. Their Q team is having problems because they want more changes to the arena to make it more modern and more. I think it's going to be profitable. So that's a very, very big issue. And I think looking down the line, there's going to be a lot of very big issues, I think, with maintaining some of these smaller markets in such a diverse and large market American Hockey League going down the line. And I think, the league definitely, remember when Dave Andrews was there, guys, when he first took over, the farthest west the AHL was Rochester, New York. And the further south was Baltimore, Maryland. How times change.
Yeah, they have. And the carousel seems to never stop, but always appreciate Gerry Cantlon helping to steady things for us a little bit. Thanks for this, Gerry.
Oh, thank you, Dave. Thank you, Patrick. Appreciate it, guys. Always love to talk hockey with you. Call me anytime.
Set to wrap up episode 19 of Around the A on the Sports Podcasting Network. David Foote, Patrick Williams here. Thanks to Gerry Cantlon. Always appreciate his insight and may be one of the most in-depth reporters that we have on the program.
Yeah, he is. Jerry's seen it all. Jerry's been around for the better part of 30 years. He's watched this league really go from what was in a lot of ways a small operation to what it is today, playing in a lot of big facilities and big markets. He's seen that evolution, and Gerry has a real good grip on the business side of things as well. And I think the biggest thing with Gerry is that he's plugged in. I mean, he's come up with stuff, rumors that have come true that at the time seemed way out of left field and really kind of outlandish. and yet he was able to be the first one on that. So, at this stage in his career, he knows kind of where all the skeletons are and where all the best sources are. And he's always one of the first guys I go to if I have a question and if I want to know if I'm on the right track with something, because more often than not, he's really has his finger on the pulse of the league and really where things are going. And he can really find that intersection between the hockey side of things, but also the business and the financial aspects as well.
Yeah, and I always appreciate his time from Hartford for sure. Let's, before we go, get into some of the games to watch this week. I think next week is when we'll really start to break down the playoff picture and who's in, who's not. We could see the first team clinch their playoff berth. The Milwaukee Admirals are right on the cusp. A lot of other teams still have some work to do, so we'll save it one more week to get into that. But what matchups are you looking forward to this week?
First one I'm looking at is the big 2-game set down in Charlotte, the Charlotte Checkers against those Providence Bruins. We talked about them earlier in the show, and they met last year in the playoffs. Charlotte took that series in the first round, but it should be a real good setup. Charlotte's will be wrapping up a 6-game homestand. They had lost the first 2 games of the homestand after a pretty successful 3-3 road trip. So I'm looking to see how Charlotte can handle things in that regard, because they go back on the road afterwards for another 6-game or so. And as far as Providence, they've been just obviously on a great run here. If they can sustain it going down there, they can really give Hershey and Belleville a real big push for top spot in the Eastern Conference. So that's the first one I'm looking at. The second one I'm looking at is Colorado-Stockton, 2 teams out in the Pacific Division that are really in a tough fight right now. Second place Colorado, third place Stockton, 2 points separating them, and Colorado's only 3 points off the division lead behind Tucson. So it's a real good matchup. They've had some good games this year already, and they also play a 2-game set out in Stockton. So interested to see where they can go with both clubs, because that Pacific right now is down to pretty much a 5-team race. Bakersfield has fallen way off the pace, so it's Ontario, San Diego battling for 4th, and then you have Tucson, Colorado, Stockton in that top 3. So, but either way, a really good club's probably will be left behind, won't make the playoffs. But really, none of them have any real great amount of leeway right now to have any sort of sustained slump. So that's a real good matchup out there in the Western Conference this weekend.
Looking at the playoff primer from the American Hockey League, most teams with 14 or 15 games left. You've got one team in there, Charlotte, with 17, and the lowest number to clinch, magic number, which is wins needed, or combined with losses of those on the playoff bubble, 4 for the Milwaukee Admirals. But after that, the next closest division leader to clinching, their magic number is still at 14. That's Tucson in the Pacific Division, 17 for Belleville in the North, 15 for Hershey in the Atlantic. So still 7+ wins for most of those teams before we really get an idea of who is going to be on that run towards the Calder Cup this season. And again, of course, we will take a look at that next week, along with a whole lot of other fun stuff. We'll have some more guests and inside info for you. And if you've got some thoughts on stories you'd like us to discuss, guests you'd like us to speak to, don't forget you can send us an email at aroundtheapod@gmail.com or get us on Twitter at aroundtheapod, at Patrick Williams, at PWilliamsNHL, or myself at Footy on the Air. And we'd love to hear from you and get a little bit more feedback on how things are going and what you'd like to see moving forward. For now, thanks again to Gerry Cantlon and Rob Lippolis, and to you for listening. We'll talk to you next week when we hit milestone episode 20 on Around the A on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Thanks for listening to Around the A. Be sure to tune in again next week. Find Around the A on the Sports Podcasting Network, iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Interact with us on social media. Give us your thoughts using the hashtag AroundTheA and follow us at AroundTheA Pod.